All right, let's get underway now. It's a couple minutes after 2:30, so we have quite a few people online. Thank you everybody for attending.
Great. So I'll just officially welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the Atlantica Center for Energy's Natural Gas Forum, uh, Powering Economic Growth. This is part two. We held an earlier event in December, and John's going to explain a little bit more why. My name is Michelle Robichaud. I'm the president of the Atlantica Center for Energy. I'm joined by my colleague, Jonathan Alward, who's our VP of Policy. Before we begin today's webinar, though, I'd like to first acknowledge that this webinar is being hosted from the Kennebecasis Valley and St. John, which is situated on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Wolastoqey. We seek to repair and rebuild meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples and honor these lands which hold the hopes of future generations. For those of you who don't know, the Atlantica Center for Energy proactively engages with industry, government, the education and research sectors, and the public to foster sustainable growth related to energy opportunities in Atlantic Canada. The center represents most of the largest producers, distributors, and consumers of energy across Atlantic Canada. And our board also includes representation from each of the 4 Atlantic provincial governments, the federal government through ACOA, academic and research organizations, and the broader community. Our work really aims to foster partnerships, facilitate dialogue like today, and improve energy literacy, which brings us to why we are here. I'm now going to pass the speaking over to my colleague, Jonathan. But before I do, I just would like to emphasize that Atlantica's work is technology agnostic. We believe that Atlantic Canada's future prosperity will require a diversity of energy solutions to secure and deliver affordable, reliable, and increasingly clean energy. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. I think you touched on just briefly. This is our second public webinar about natural gas in Atlantic Canada. Last December, we hosted part 1 of the webinar, which focused on supply of natural gas into this region. We heard presentations on how gas gets here, where it comes from, and then what untapped natural resources exist in the Atlantic provinces. And I believe it's equally important, though, to understand how and why natural gas is used in the region today and what the future of our gas system might look like. So today, natural gas helps heat and power many businesses and some homes across the Maritimes. It also plays a significant role in offshore oil extraction and electricity generation. So if you look at primary energy demand across the 4 Atlantic provinces in 2022, you can see that natural gas supplied more primary energy in the region than did all the non-hydro renewables. It's also supplied as much energy as nuclear did if you look at New Brunswick alone. But how will the role of gas evolve in the future as we transition to a cleaner grid and a cleaner economy overall? Will natural gas continue to be used in an increasingly decarbonized world? And if so, how long could it be used for? With these questions in mind, we've assembled 3 sessions of speakers, and we're hoping to answer these questions clearly today. So just a few housekeeping notes before we dive in. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll post it to our website at atlanticaenergy.org as soon as possible, in case anybody wants to learn more or if they missed anything today. There's also a question box that's open if you'd like to type in questions for the speakers. I can't guarantee we'll get to them all today, but if not, I'll do my best to follow up with answers to your questions as soon as I can. So with that in mind, our first panel is focusing on how natural gas is used in Atlantic Canada. And we're first going to hear from Kevin Larmer, who's the Senior Director, Policy and Regulation at the Canadian Gas Association. Kevin helps in shaping policies and regulations that support the industry's commitment to safety, affordability, and innovation. Second, we're going to hear from Jason Walsh, the Regional Manager of New Services for Liberty New Brunswick, New Brunswick's gas distributor, and Jason leads the utility sales and marketing team. And third, we're going to hear from Eastwood Energy's newly appointed president, Chris McCauley. Chris previously served as the VP of Engineering and Construction and Operations for Nova Scotia's gas distributor. Thank you, gentlemen, and I'm now going to turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you kindly for the introduction, Jonathan. Happy to work with you and your team on much of this work. So I'll do a quick overview of just natural gas in Canada, a little outside of the Atlantic provinces, just to set up the two utilities who you're going to hear. So first, we'll look at the next slide, John. So these are gas utilities across Canada. There's approximately 17 in total. You can see most follow the population density along our southern border, and this, for the large part, mostly mimics our mainline transmission across Canada. Natural gas serves over 20 million Canadians and counting. We supply about 40% of total energy needs for Canadians. And in total, there's over 600,000 kilometers of natural gas lines across the country for the distribution sector alone, not including our services to homes. So how's that gas used in Canada? Well, the vast majority, total industrial use is extremely high. This is what's fueling many of our sectors like cement, steel. This is a continuously growing industry need that is looking for the reliable, affordable natural gas so that they can remain competitive on a global market for the products that they're creating here in Canada. We'll also point at the power generation use of natural gas. We do see growing power generation use, particularly in provinces who are looking to add natural gas peaking plants that are there to help augment the income of renewable energy generation sources, as well as it's working as baseload in some of our prairie provinces to supply the electric generation that's needed. Residential and commercial buildings also play a large role in the use of natural gas. For the most part, home heating and hot water take up the bulk of that load that's being pulled in and used for our winter peaking needs of natural gas heating. Another interesting on this slide is just the all others, and it's a terrible name that we need to probably look at using, but this is the feedstock use of natural gas, and the feedstocks across Canada, in the chemistry or fertilizer industries who need natural gas to create the products that they're using. So that's also hopefully a growing demand cycle that we see in Canada as well. Next slide, John. And of course, buildings and industry, this is kind of the bread and butter for the natural gas distributors across Canada who CGA represents. Gas does play a larger role than electricity, mostly because of home heating and the winter peaking needs that our buildings need in Canada. As well as you can see, the industrial side is also growing continuously. Something that I don't have on the slide, but I thought I would note, is the vast amounts of gas storage that we have in Canada. This is mostly in Alberta and Ontario, but we also have some in BC and Saskatchewan and Quebec. 948 billion cubic feet of capacity is storage in Canada. That equates to about 50 days of winter heating demand that's in the ground in storage. And this is what makes our gas system so reliable and able to meet the winter peaking needs that we have across the country. Next slide, John. And of course, we'll look at home heating. I know that this will be talked about by Liberty and Eastward, but home heating plays an important role in the use of natural gas. You do see on the map here that most of the home heating is used west of Ontario, and then a smaller load is on the eastern provinces, which we'll be talking about. I note here too that total gas demand in the last 15 years has increased by about 63%. And this is pointing to the need for the natural gas industry to continue producing and transmitting that gas across Canada. It's also pointing to the need of infrastructure and the infrastructure that we have in the ground right now and how important that is to Canadians to be able to use. The next slide, John. And of course, our customer growth, this is a continually increase of about 2% year over year in customer adds across the country. We do see that ads are still taking place in Atlantica, Canada, but maybe not at the same rate as others. These ads also pretty closely follow the new building market in Canada. As new homes are being built, new subdivisions are being built, natural gas is going into these homes, so we continually see that growth, particularly as our population in Canada continues to grow. So what I wanted to set up here was just the large role that natural gas plays across Canada. And now we're going to look at two of our Atlantic members in Liberty and Eastward who are going to focus in a little more closely on each of their provinces. So thank you kindly, John. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Kevin. Now Jason is going to talk about Liberty in New Brunswick.
All right. First off, thanks so much, John and Michelle, for the opportunity for us to speak here today. We flip over to the next slide. Perfect. All right, so the natural gas distribution franchise in New Brunswick here is operated by Liberty, and we're still considered a greenfield utility. And what does that mean? So we've been operating for about 25 years here in New Brunswick. So most utilities on the east coast of North America have been operating in a range of about 100 to 150 years. So that puts us in a unique state. So we operate about 1,200 kilometers of pipelines that serve 12,500 customers in 14 communities. So far, we invested $500 million in the province, and 2/3 of residents benefit from natural gas. So how do we get there? Energy, with energy choice at public schools, hospitals, universities, retail locations. It's hard to go about your daily business within New Brunswick, southeast especially, without being in touch with natural gas. In the last 5 years, we were able to save $45 million by choosing natural gas to consumers over the other alternate energy forms. And we're very proud that we've been able to reduce 3.5 million tons of GHG emissions through taking people off of oil, propane, and other alternate fuels. Next slide, please. So an interesting fact in New Brunswick, and something that's not talked about very much, is it's almost a parity, the amount of power used in New Brunswick, natural gas versus electricity. So within the two systems, a lot of people might not know, basically about 43 million GJs is used of natural gas and 12.7 million megawatt hours, which equates to pretty much a 50-50 parity within the province. So it's sometimes a little bit underplayed within the province, but it's on equal footing in terms of energy sources. And so that all operates a whole lot of questions. So like, how would you displace all this natural gas if you went to pure electrification? How many electric power plants would need to be built? And within the public system itself, there's 7 million GJs that are distributed within the NB public system. So there's lots of capacity. So right now, with the very minor upgrades, the existing system could be doubled very quickly. Next slide, please. So the way we kind of talk about it, we use the analogy a little bit like a three-legged stool. So the three-legged stool we talk about is the affordability, the reliability and resilience, and the sustainability. And those three legs hold up the ratepayers. And a lot of the talk recently has been focused primarily on the environmental leg, and now you see movement talking about the other two as well. So affordability and reliability are very much concerns moving into the market, and without kind of moving those within all the energy sources, you see ratepayers having to be challenged, which I'll talk about in the next couple slides as well. Next one, please. So this is just the scorecard here for Liberty as a whole. So last year, we saved homeowners 24% on over electricity. The interesting part, though, is there's a couple other things that play into that. There's 3 months within those. There was also carbon tax in there. So if you remove the 3 months of carbon tax, which will be out next year, that bumps that up another 6%, bringing it to 30%. And also there's a 10% residential subsidy. So we're not sure if that will be removed, but if that remained in place, we'd be approximately 30% savings for residential next year, and for businesses 46%. As we talk about those lags and reliability, so just go back one more slide, please. On the reliability on the 75 years, the 75 years, just when we're talking about that kind of point, that's about the average a customer will face an outage. So we're not measuring outages in hours, we're measuring it in terms of lifetimes. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this chart we'll just talk about really quickly. This is just basically showing, we talking about where we're going and as things phase out. If you take some EEI data going from 210 to 250, basically from that period, over that 40-year span, looking at all power sources basically increasing by 50%. Obviously, we're seeing renewables increasing the fastest, as they should, but the tail of the tape is where you're seeing is other forms of energy, such as natural gas and petroleum products, are not reducing. And in fact, natural gas is actually increasing in usage. Next slide, please. So the next slide just kind of outlines a little bit from our friends to our borders to the south there. So most new electrical generation, this data is coming out of New England, is natural gas. You're seeing natural gas peaking plants that was talked about before is becoming quite prolific. And then also within New Brunswick, there's been recent announcements that natural gas peaking plants are looked to be the solution for this increasing demand as well. Next slide, please. So as we kind of just get over to the next kind of section here, we kind of wanted to go back to a fact that was actually just in that previous call I want to bring. So Premier Holt, just in that call that was referenced this afternoon right before this, Premier Holt said, energy demand is going through the roof. That was the quote that was just given just minutes before this call we jumped on, which I think sets the stage pretty well. So we do understand that natural gas is going to be used as power generation, and we don't discourage that. We want to see more of that, but also distributed gas energy plays a big role as well. So that first diagram on the top left, that's from the Fit for the Future report that was released March 23 from NB Power. And that report's just basically showing that natural gas can be used obviously for production of base load electricity, but also serves a big point for distributed gas as well. So when using it within power generation, there's about 63% power loss versus using distributed gas, which has a 10% power loss. So that's where the distributed gas, when available, can also help move into those areas as well. So the other two charts just to talk to briefly are just kind of showing the peaking situation, which we know is a true reality. So within New Brunswick, within Atlantica, within Canada, we know we have true realities within our climate where peaking is a reality, where we have about 30 days a year which require infrastructure to be built to a higher level, and that's where natural gas can play a substantial role in impeding those peaking days and making. So it was talked about future about home heating and hot water, and how that, when you're talking about a home, about 70% of the energy within a home is used for heat and hot water, how natural gas can play a role to negate that. So within New Brunswick, as I mentioned, there's about an equal split power between electricity and natural gas. When you look at a national scale, it's actually we're underusing it in Atlantic Canada. So on a nationwide scale, natural gas is used about 2.1 times higher than electricity. And within the utility here within New Brunswick, as mentioned, we distribute about 7 million GJs, and we have an existing system that can handle about twice the volume. So some of the key insights to talk about are natural gas power generation will increase. We will see this coming to within our region, but also how are we going to use greater near-term value from maximizing existing natural gas systems within our region. That's it for myself. Oh, sorry, one more slide, I forgot. And just on the last slide there, wanted to kind of end on a note talking about integrated policy. So basically, at the end of the day, what we're looking to encourage is we want utilities and producers to work together. We want to be able to distribute, as we said before, affordable, reliable, and it's sustainable energy for all our consumers' needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. You know, I'll probably hit on a lot of the same points that Jason made and Kevin have made. You can flip to the first slide there, Jonathan. But just to kind of give a little bit of a boilerplate rundown of Eastward Energy. You know, like Liberty, New Brunswick, we've only been around for about 23 years. And in that time, we've just continued to grow our system out, expand throughout our franchise area. We've grown. Although we have a relatively small number of customers, we like to talk in terms of that energy delivered. And again, because of the types of customers that we serve today, we serve about 25% of the equivalent energy as Nova Scotia Power does. If you consider, and that's not including natural gas generation of electricity. If you consider that, it brings us much closer up to that parity that Jason mentioned in New Brunswick. We've invested, similarly, about $500 million in the province, infrastructure, long-term gas supply commitments to bring natural gas to the province. And yeah, as I said, only about 10 million GJs of energy that we deliver on an annual basis. On the next slide, we talk a lot about, we're relatively small. We're a small utility. We're 80 people, and we sort of operate in, sort of the central part of the province. But the reason we deliver so much energy compared to the electricity utility is the types of customers that we serve. This is a quick snapshot of some of the large customers that use natural gas in Nova Scotia. And recognize lots of the names here. We're going to hear from some of them later with Maritime Paper. Again, these are large industries that use a lot of energy and that in many cases support the communities and that they operate in. A huge part of the provincial economy. So we always like to think less about the number of customers and really more about the amount of energy, the volume of energy that we're delivering. And in many cases, the businesses that we serve, these are in industries that can't use electricity for the processes that they run. We hear that from our customers regularly, that without natural gas, they wouldn't be able to operate in the communities that they operate, or they wouldn't be able to operate economically enough to compete against other markets. So on to the next slide. This is just, again, referring to the types of customers we serve. You look at the total throughput of our system in 2025, that 10 million GJs, and only about 4% of that throughput went to residential customers. Even though half of our customers are residential, they use a small amount of that energy overall. 96%, 30% of that is industrial, 66% of that is commercials. So when we go to the next slide, Jonathan, we have a little bit of an animation. Hopefully it'll sort of play through the years, and Jonathan can start it up here. As you said, we started back in 2003. There was a Maritimes Northeast pipeline that came into Halifax. Those that know the area, this is the Halifax Dartmouth HRM. And year over year, we sort of continue to expand all those blue lines showing where we've expanded natural gas lines within HRM. And you can kind of see, we'll extend out to areas where there are large commercial customers or where there are large new subdivisions, like the areas of Bedford and areas like that. So that's sort of how we've grown our system. That $500 million of investment has happened through slow, steady growth, looking for areas where we can economically expand the pipeline, looking for where there's large industry and large commercial buildings that would use natural gas. So when we think about that energy, and you see the skyline in that previous with lots of office towers and multi-unit residential buildings. We talk about 25% of the energy use of Nova Scotia Power. When you think about that on a peak basis, on the coldest day of the year, that number's closer to 35-40%. We deliver 35 to 40% of the peak energy on the coldest day of the year that Nova Scotia Power does. And so I think it's sometimes easy in this region, as Jason mentioned, the gas utilities are new, to sort of not be thought of as much as the electricity utilities in terms of a key part of the energy industry. But hopefully some of these numbers reinforce how important the natural gas is to the province and to the customers that we serve. So just on the next slide, which is the last one, Jonathan, we'll talk a lot about and governments and regulators. There is a real need, I think, for collaboration, certainly in Nova Scotia, but around the region as well. And one of the ways that we think about that is collaboration between the gas utilities and the electric utility. And we talk about this in terms of hybrid heating or peak mitigation. Some people would refer it to as. So certainly there's a lot of growth in electric demand, a lot of electrification of homes, businesses, and transportation. And that means that the need for new electricity generation continues to grow, and that's becoming more and more expensive. So as I talked about, that coldest day of the year, your system needs to be able to meet that peak. So what the way we often think about it is that when a gas and electricity system work together, when there's a planning process, when there's an integrated resource plan that considers all of the different forms of energy, natural gas can actually play a really important part in mitigating the peak on those coldest days. By using natural gas to heat instead of more electricity, you're actually able to avoid and delay adding generation to the energy system, to the electrical system. And the reality is, again, when we talk about how much energy is actually delivered through the natural gas system, the electricity systems just aren't built and designed to be able to supply that much energy. So there's some really good opportunities in terms of, as I said, IRP, integrated resource planning, looking at demand side management programs and how they're designed and what sort of behaviors are being incented by those programs. And so I think it's an exciting time in the energy business that there does seem to be an appetite now for collaboration between utilities and certainly with regulators. And so we're really looking forward to that. We're excited to be part of the energy future in Nova Scotia. I think that's it for me, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chris, Jason, and Kevin. I appreciate the presentation. And now we're going to go and shift our focus and try and answer why is natural gas used in Atlantic Canada and in the Maritimes in particular. So this panel is going to be moderated by Mitch Raymond, the Vice President of Nova Scotia with the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Mitch has been with CME for 10 years and previously worked in the aerospace sector. We're also joined by panelists Matthew Rust and Neil Brown. Matthew's the CFO and VP Administration for Maritime Paper, He joined Maritime Paper in 2015 and oversees the company's financial reporting, treasury, data analytics, information technology, and other key areas. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from St. Mary's University, a CPA designation, and an MBA from the University of Calgary. Neil Brown is the president over Bellboy Dry Cleaning and Laundry Limited in Fredericton. He's owned the business for 22 years after purchasing it from the founder, his father, Robert. Neil attended the University of Ontario and received his MBA or Master's in Business degree from the University of Windsor. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm now going to turn it over to Mitch.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan, and Michelle, thanks for the opportunity. And definitely, as we've seen with the first three, identifying some of the things around natural gas. So CME being a representative of the manufacturing sector is, these are critical points. I mean, just to share with you before we get into the panel discussion is, many companies, this is actually always either priority 1 or 2 that we always hear. So it's energy. Things don't happen without energy is the basis. So the roundtable or the panel discussion, I'm pleased to have Matthew and Neil joining today, and I'm just going to ask some questions so the the individuals watching this video now and later can learn a little bit more about what energy means for industrial organizations. So I think I'll start off. So the question that I'll start off with is for Matthew and Neil, and I'll start with you, Matthew, if I could. Tell us a little bit about your business operation. What's the role of natural gas in your business? Talk a little bit about actually the size, your location of the organization, how long Maritime Paper's been around, what do you make, and just all in all the general things around how important is natural gas to Maritime Paper. So if I could start with you, Matthew, that'd be great.
Sure. So Maritime Paper was incorporated in 1931, so we've got 95 years under our belt. And over that time period, we have grown to have a presence in every Atlantic Canadian province. So we have our main plant is in Dartmouth. Then we have another fairly large plant in Moncton, and then somewhat smaller operations in Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland. And so what we make is corrugated packaging. So a lot of people would refer to it in layman's terms as cardboard boxes, but technically it's a corrugated box, and it can either be used to move product from one place to another. Think about it like French fries in a brown box that are going to different restaurants, or it can be used for high graphics packaging that people would buy off the shelf. And we can do either. We service many. We are one of 2 large format corrugated producers in Atlantic Canada, and we service everything from large industrial manufacturers and food processors down to small mom and pop blueberry farms and other smaller customers. So pretty integral part of the supply chain. And our main machine is a corrugator, which takes 3 pieces of paper and has a top liner, a bottom liner, and then a piece of fluted medium in the middle. That's what gives the product its strength. And that corrugator rests in Dartmouth. So that is the main machine that we use natural gas on. The reason why that's natural gas is important is because that machine heats to 360 degrees. So it needs a lot of heat to make corrugated board, and that requires a lot of energy. So we were an early adopter to natural gas for Nova Scotia, and we've been on natural gas over 25 years. So prior to that, we were on heavy bunker fuel, which of course requires delivery, it requires storage on site, and all the risks that go with that. So we were an early adopter to natural gas here. We're also on natural gas in our Moncton facility for a couple of pieces of high heat equipment there, as well as building heat. So, but we estimate over the last 25 years that we have saved 67% on cost and had a similar savings. We have a 32% emissions ratio over that period versus electricity, and which would equate to about 150,000 tons of emissions. So natural gas has been very good to us. It has been very good to the environment, and has has been right along that green path. Look, Maritime Paper we are an environmental company by nature. We were sort of green before green was even known as a thing, right? We use recycle. Most of the product that we use is recycled paper. We use cornstarch as our adhesive, and we use steam in the process that's recycled from water, that's generated from recycled water. So we like that story, and we like the way that natural gas has fit into that story as well along the way. We know of no technology no corrugator technology in North America that runs on electricity. We're not even aware that electric corrugators are even for sale. So if natural gas disappeared, we would likely require a move back to heavy bunker or heavy fuel oil to stay in business. So we certainly don't want that. And this, obviously, the removal of natural gas put us at an extreme competitive disadvantage against some of the largest players in the world, so which we often compete against. So that's really kind of Maritime Paper, a journey with natural gas, what we do, and happy to be here today. Happy to talk. I'm sure there's many of our customers out in the audience today as well. So good to have you aboard.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matthew, and thanks for sharing some of the things of actually being a jet setter, I guess, in terms of 25 years you've been with natural gas, and quite honestly, the savings that you talked about. And I think as we build this out, we'll talk a little bit more about the benefits of natural gas and how you guys were able to achieve what you have. So what I'm going to do now, actually, Neil Brown's with Bellboy Dry Cleaning and Laundry. So thanks, Neil, for being able to attend. And if you could answer similar questions about your organization, natural gas, in terms of how you use it, how much or should I say, how long you've been using it, and those kind of things, that'd be great.
Okay. Bellboy, we built a new production facility. Well, not new now. 22 years ago, we built a production facility in Fredericton in the industrial park. And when we built it, the engineer just said, you got to go with natural gas. It's cleaner. It's on demand, and it's just the way to go. So we didn't really put much thought into it, and we went with natural gas. We're a dry cleaning and commercial launderer business. We do several hotels in the province of New Brunswick, table linen, floor mats, normal dry cleaning, coveralls, industrial uniforms. We cover the entire province of New Brunswick. My father started the business 60 years ago, and I bought it 22 years ago. We use approximately 1,600 gigajoules every month. So we don't really have that many ups and downs of our demand. We use about 1,600 every month. And in our old facility, which was in downtown Fredericton, we used furnace fuel, and we would have runouts 10, 12 times a year. It would disrupt our business. Every time they came and loaded up the oil, we'd have to shut down the plant, and they would have to come and fill it up. So for us, the natural gas was a godsend because it's always there when we need it. When we do have peaks, we don't have to worry. We never have to worry about going on empty. I know that the footprint is a lot better for the environment. So overall, we're very happy with our decision to go with natural gas.
Great. Thanks a lot for that, Neil. So Neil, just to follow up on some of the things you just said here. So if you were to look at using natural gas, over the years, I mean, you would, similar to what Matthew indicated, there's savings that you've recognized, for example, you talked about, I think, furnace oil. So what does that look like in terms of helping the competitiveness of the business in terms of going from that, and even in some environmental elements that you might have achieved out of this? Are there some good outcomes, I guess, for the business?
Yes, because our business, there's been a lot. There's not very many independent businesses that do what I do anymore. So you have the multinationals like Cintas, Canadian Linen, UniFirst. And so in order for me to compete, I have to, yes, I compete on service, but at the end of the day, everybody thinks with their pocketbook. So I have to be competitive. And so they're all using, all their facilities are on natural gas. So in order for me to be competitive, I would have to be on natural gas, or I would never be able to compete properly.
Great. Thanks. No, and that's always definitely a strong element to any business, is really that, it's the competitiveness as well as, environmental, pushing towards cleaner, reduction of greenhouse gas. So my next question, I guess, that might be of interest to the group here is, so Matthew, I'll go back to you. When we look at, for example, the business, and you kind of outlined some of the things, for example, that you're using natural gas more and more of in terms of certain processes, what would the mix, like in terms of, if you look at natural gas versus even electrification, and I would think those are probably your two main energy sources. What does it look like for Maritime Paper as the business continues to grow, like in terms of more use of natural gas, electrification? Just what does that future kind of entail for Maritime Paper?
Well, we recently in 2024, the end of 2024, we did a major capital expenditure in Dartmouth of a new converting machine that is run by electricity. So we do have a fairly high footprint in terms of electricity as well. In terms of the ratio of energy spent between natural gas and electricity, I'm not sure exactly what our ratio is offhand, but I would say if I took a stab, it'd be like a 60-40, 60% natural gas, 40% electricity in what we consume. And then, look, we want the most reliable equipment, the best equipment that we can get. If we had natural gas options, we would look at them as well. But a lot of those machines that we buy, they are electric machines. So
yeah, and one of the things, and I think it was Chris that brought it up in terms of the word reliability. That 75 years you're measuring reliability in terms of that element versus hours or so many days per year. What do you feel in terms of reliability? When you look at using natural gas in the processes, what's the reliability rate that you guys are seeing at Maritime Paper?
Oh, in terms of natural gas, I mean,
yeah,
none. We experience no downtime due to natural gas. None. I've been here at Maritime Paper for about 11 years. Never had an outage in terms of natural gas. The electricity. Everybody knows the story with electricity, and you have to roll with the punches with electricity sometimes, which we do. But in terms, and the other piece is the lack of on-site storage relative to fuel, like bunker fuel or whatever. Like that removing that from the equation is a big benefit. The removal of that risk. So, but in terms of reliability, it's second to none.
Yeah, no, excellent. Actually, and you bring up a really good point about on-site storage. You get into a lot of regulatory, the convenience of natural gas is there at end of pipe, being plumbed in there. So that's great. No, thanks, Matthew, for that. So, Neil, talking about reliability, just expanding on what Matthew said, what do you see in terms of the convenience, the reliability of natural gas used at Bellboy?
Well, we've been doing it for 22 years. We've never ever had a problem. So the reliability is 100%. Our problem is now, like we were looking at purchasing or adding another dryer to our facility, but we can't add any more without doing infrastructure. So that's, we wouldn't buy any more equipment that was not, we would only go with natural gas. We'd like it, but we have to now look at, okay, if we want to add more, how, like, we're going to have to do some infrastructure changes. So that's what we're going to look at. And like, we use a lot of dryers, and the dryers that we use, you cannot buy them electric. You can only buy them either natural gas or propane. So because of the efficiency of natural gas, we'd have to put a whole power grid outside if we wanted to use electric.
Excellent, actually, excellent point, Neil. I was just wondering, even if you look, and you just talked about adding on a new dryer, is it fair to say that, in terms of being in that business, that any kind of expansions, any kind of growth, more than likely the energy need would be in the form of natural gas?
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
But like I said, we have hit our limit with the infrastructure that we have placed. We cannot add any more. We can replace, but we cannot add anymore. So that's something that we're going to have to look at. Gotcha.
All right. No, thank you very much. Actually, because that's one of the things that actually we wanted to talk a little bit about as well as when you're studying your like the inputs and available technologies. And I think, Matthew, if we can go back to yourself to talk about this, is if you're looking at technologies, I know Maritime Paper just, I believe it's just a couple of years ago, the Evolve, I think it's the Evolve project you guys have implemented. The high tech, piece of equipment. And I know Maritime Paper, CKF, very familiar with the company for sure. Always looking to, that growth opportunity, getting out there and expanding new technologies. How would you explain, or how would you describe, moving forward, kind of the vision of Maritime Paper with regards to further expansions around technology? And then, for example, when you're doing these expansions, there's always, impacts, like you said, on emissions and the environmental footprint, we'll call it here, is kind of the outlook always looking, for example, is, diversification. Like, for example, would you see natural gas as being always something that you're probably going to more than likely increase the use of based on the the value of that energy?
Yeah. So in terms of in terms of the like the profile, so we service a lot of Atlantic Canadian companies. So we're part of that immediate supply chain, but we also export. We have a high percentage of our sales that are exported as well to the United States, to Central Canada, offshore, and so when we are in those places, we are competing against customers that are closer to our customers' footprint as well. So it is critical that we keep our sword sharp, and so the natural gas, like I mentioned, it allows us to do that. And then we also have to stay technologically competitive. And so that's where our Evolve project was rolled out and allowed us to be sort of on the leading edge of that process. In terms of the increased use of natural gas, if we had to if we had to replace our corrugator, if we had to replace some of our other high heat equipment, they'd likely be replaced by natural gas, similar pieces of natural gas equipment. That's generally where we focus our natural gas usages, on those high heat, because you just can't get it with electricity.
Oh, perfect. And it's interesting, and thanks, Matthew, for that. That you bring up the thing about competitiveness. And if you look at the energy used in Atlantic Canada versus other places in the country, or south of the border. How do you find with Maritime Paper, like if you look at the energy cost of the organization versus other operating expenses, does those costs do they help keep competitiveness? I guess if you look at price stability of natural gas, like are those prices in terms of the expenses of Maritime Papers, how big of a piece of pie is energy in terms of what you guys do there? And based on that, I guess the second part of the question would be is, what is the cost? What's the stability of the prices that you guys see with using natural gas?
So to answer your question, yes, energy is our energy would be our fourth biggest cost. Maybe our fifth biggest cost in terms of the organization. So it is important to us. We have, we have to, when, for example, when the carbon tax went on, and then when the carbon tax came off, that's a big impact for us. But in terms of stability, I think both our suppliers, our supplier in New Brunswick being Liberty, and our supplier in Nova Scotia being Eastward, have been able to deliver fairly stable pricing along the way. We're not on the same pricing mechanisms, but both are relatively stable. We can see some movement when there's shocks. Because it is a worldwide price, we can see a little bit of movement, but our natural gas partners, we have great contact with them to give us, insight into where the prices are going. So. Perfect.
No, thank you for that. And the reason why I asked is we always hear, for example, CMEs, energy is always a big, always usually in the top three in terms of cost for an organization. And quite honestly, is the more that you can hedge those input costs, that all equates in terms of competitiveness, right? That's part of the equation. So no, thank you for that, Matthew. So Neil, can I ask you the same question in terms of, the competitiveness? Like, where does energy costs, fit within your company? And really in terms of competitiveness, now you mentioned earlier that, for example, you're competing with some bigger organizations, quite honestly is, I don't know, I don't want to say small fish in a big pond, but, how does, in terms of energy, that usage piece, the stability of prices in New Brunswick, because you're in Fredericton. So how does that all play in terms of remaining competitive?
So energy represents $32,000 a month for my company, which is, besides labor, the second biggest expense that we have every month. So we really, when the carbon tax came off, that was a huge thing for us, but we gave it all back because of the price increase this year with natural gas. So we didn't get much of a saving. So, when the price of natural gas spikes, it really affects us because we use doesn't matter the month, we use approximately 1,600 gigajoules every month. So what we're doing now to try to be more competitive is that we're not getting off natural gas. We like it, but we're trying to find more efficiencies. So I'm actually, we've hired a company that's going to come in and do total efficiency of our plant, and maybe he feels that there's a few things that we can implement that will help reduce our monthly consumption, and that the payback should only be 3 or 4 years, and that long term will help us remain or maybe become more competitive. So we're looking at purchasing a heat exchanger, which tempers the water before it goes into the washing machine, so you use less energy to bring it up to the proper temperature to clean the articles that we're washing.
Perfect. So really the whole thing is energy. When you look at the energy use, is still natural gas is still critical, being number two in terms of the expenses of running your business, but at the same time as which is a really good point, energy efficiency and different ways of managing and making yourself more competitive is where you're looking at next.
Yeah, we're not moving off natural gas. I'm just trying
Yeah.
to curtail how much we consume every month, because like I said, when you have the huge spikes, that could we're a $5 million company, and in a month our natural gas can go from 20,000 to 30,000. We use the same amount, but it's totally tied to the price, which we have absolute no control over. So we're going to have to try to manage that.
Perfect. No, great. And that's actually an excellent point to bring up, as many organizations, there's only so much control, I guess, if you have certain things. But the other things, for example, is making your business more competitive is always a key thing. So with only 5 minutes to go, I'm going to ask one, if a closing question for both of you. So looking at where we are, lots of great discussion on the natural gas piece is, and we see these emerging, we'll call it dynamics in the world in terms of energy. We know we need more. One of the things that, for example, is maybe, I don't know, Neil, if you can share with this one here, is there any kind of consideration, natural gas, like electricity, it's critical for economic growth. Without it enough, the competitiveness of it is there anything that you could see that we could, for example, the natural gas suppliers, what you'd love to see from them more in terms of support, or, for example, any other kind of partners, I'll say government or other, and natural gases. If you were as a business owner, what are some of the things that you would love to see more in terms of natural gas, in terms of supports, or making things more workable, I guess, for your business? So just really a thought in terms of what you're looking for.
Well, I think, like, I like natural gas and I want to stay with natural gas, but some of the industrial users, we're using so much of it, and there's things out there, there's efficiencies, there's new technologies that could help manage how much we use on a monthly basis. And I believe that the suppliers or the distributors should let that be known to their customers, how to go, what's out there, how to go get it, is there government grant? Because it's no good if, if we're not told about it and we don't go and get it, because we may not, some businesses, natural gas could be the thing that puts them out of business, and it's not anybody's fault, but the price fluctuations are so extreme that it would be nice, if I had to do it all over again, when I built my facility 21 years ago, I would have done more strategic planning. I would have said, okay, natural gas, this is the future. We're going to use it. It's here for the long term. But what can we put in that will make the consumption on a monthly basis less, and that it will make it more affordable and make it more competitive? So I don't think natural gas is going away, but I think with the turmoil that is happening in the world, we're going to get a lot more fluctuations, and some organizations are not going to be able to take these fluctuations. They get 3 or 4 months where it spikes 30-40%. We're all dealing with small margins now. That could be enough to put them out of business. So I think the suppliers and the end users should be working more together to make everything more efficient and more effective. That's my 2 cents.
100%. Love your 2 cents, and I'll say that was worth 3 cents. So and quite honestly, just want to say that those are some similar things, Neil. It doesn't matter what business you talk with, exactly those things. You talked about strategic planning and kind of forecast. We're in one of these worlds that it's a tipsy-turvy every day, right? Energy, we know we need it. So thank you for that. Matthew, anything in terms of, from a maritime paper perspective, just on this discussion, what could work better in terms of partners, if you look at strategic kind of where maritime paper's going, like, what's your thoughts, similar to what Neil, just kind of shared with the group?
Yeah, I think that, well, I think Neil could speak for us pretty much the same. I mean, in terms of that, I guess what I would like to see is for people, I think a lot of times natural gas isn't recognized for the benefit that it is, right? So we all want a cleaner world. We all want, to move our ESG goals forward. But then there is there's some realism that goes with that. And while we move from our current state to our future state, natural gas presents a great opportunity as a very clean and relatively low cost fuel in the interim. So it seems to be when we did the move 25 years ago, and then the universities were moving, everybody was celebrating these moves to natural gas, and now it seems like there's because it's a fossil fuel, it's not recognized for the value that it can bring from a knowledge standpoint. So it's not a perfect fuel. Look, it's not a perfect source of energy, but it's a very good one, and it's far better than fuel oil or one of those, coal or fuel oil. It's far superior to those in my opinion. So.
Perfect. No, thank you, Matthew, for sharing those. And I think with that said, I just want to thank Matthew and Neil for participating in this panel discussion. Really good takeaways from this. I think everybody can learn from some of the points brought. If there's any questions to the group, please, feel free to contact Jonathan, if to loop back or whatever, if there's any more additional questions, or should I say questions or comments. So thank you all, and hopefully you enjoyed the session.
Yeah, Mitch, Matthew, Neil, thank you all for those insights, and certainly agree, Mitch. If you do have any follow-up questions, either drop them in the chat or send us an email after. We'll do our best at Atlantica to try and answer those timely. So our next session, our last session, is going to be a conversation trying to answer, can natural gas help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the Maritimes? Like Matthew was just talking about, obviously it's not a perfect fuel, but in the right context, there are lots of benefits that it can bring. So we're going to hear from a moderator, Dr. Larry Hughes, a research fellow with the McEachern Institute of Public Policy and Governance at Dalhousie University. Larry was previously a professor at Dal in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and I'm sure many of you know his research is focused on energy security and energy systems, the energy transition, and climate change, and he's widely published and still frequently pens very insightful perspectives in publications across the region. Larry is going to read an interview with Jennifer Green and Mark Sidebottom. Jennifer Green leads the Canadian Biogas Association and is focused on expanding opportunities for biogas and renewable natural gas in Canada. She's an engineer and experienced educator, and her work focuses on connecting people, businesses, and governments to help grow biogas and renewable natural gas across Canada. And last but certainly not least is Mark Sidebottom, an executive advisor now with Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. Mark recently retired as the Chief Clean Energy Officer at Nova Scotia Power after a long career in the utility with his parents' company, Emera. His work at Nova Scotia Power focused on the transition off coal and helping the province reach its 80% renewable electricity target by 2030. Thank you. And now Larry will begin with a few brief slides to help set the stage for the preceding conversation. Larry?
Okay, thank you. Are you controlling the slides, or am I? Oh, you are. Okay, good. Okay, what I wanted to do, because some of the future audience might not understand where we're coming from and why we want to talk about emissions from fuels because, for example, the carbon price has suddenly disappeared. So starting with the non-electric energy use in the Maritimes, this is from 2 years ago, it's the most recent data. What you see is that natural gas is quite popular, especially in New Brunswick, to a lesser extent in Nova Scotia, and also in Prince Edward Island. That is for manufacturing, specifically potatoes and so forth from Cavendish Farms. There's also a great deal of oil used, especially in the residential sector. And there is some coal scattered around, again, primarily in Nova Scotia, but also New Brunswick. So next slide, please. Okay, now most of you will be aware of this, but again, it's for future audiences. Any conversion process will be taking energy in, such as natural gas, oil, or coal, and converting that to another energy source or an energy service. A good example would be crude oil coming into the Irving refinery and being converted or refined into gasoline. The gasoline would be an energy input into someone's vehicle, and the service they would be getting from that would be transportation. But in each case, there's two other flows that we have to consider. The first is policy. People will be setting policies for certain emissions or certain speed limits and so forth that will affect the conversion process. And then, of course, in most cases, with the exception of electricity, there are emissions. Next slide, please. Or next. Now, another key point, because this was raised in the previous talk, about efficiency. And efficiency is the ratio of energy out to energy in, or whatever the energy service is. And what we have here are the different energy sources. And again, this was raised in the previous, I believe, by Neil or Matthew. And that is the worst of the sources of energy that we can use is coal. Because here, for example, we see 80 kilograms of CO2 per gigajoule consumed. And at the other extreme, we have natural gas, which is about 52 kilograms of CO2 per gigajoule. In my original, in the slide set, oops, back please. We also have renewable natural gas here, and that ideally is carbon neutral. But Jennifer will go into more details about that as the talk progresses. Okay, next please. Now, there is a price to pay for this coal, oil, and natural gas being used. And what we see is in Nova Scotia, there's a great deal of, in residential and commercial, there's a great deal of emissions, and that is because the widespread use of fuel oil. About a third of all residential energy consumption for space heating and water heating is from oil, hence the emissions. Working across downstream oil and gas, for example, well, that's clearly the Irving refinery. They have just over 3 megatons a year. Electricity again stands out, in this case, just over 5 megatons for Nova Scotia and about 3.5 for New Brunswick. PEI has virtually none, of course, because they are importing electricity and they're also getting wind generation or renewable generation. And finally, other is primarily transportation and waste products. So we see that across emissions are clearly there, it's an issue. So the question is, well, why? Who cares? So if we go to the next slide, please. The 3 provinces have emissions targets, and each of them were set a number of years ago. Prince Edward Island is 36% below 2005, for example, and their 2005 emissions were 1.9 megatons, which means by 2030, they should have about 1.2 megatons of emissions. Now, just so an important point to note, in 2024, the emissions were 1.49 megatons, which will require PEI to be reducing at a somewhat faster rate than they have in the past, at about 50 kilotons a year. In the most extreme case, Nova Scotia has to reduce by about over half a megaton a year, and this would exceed any annual reductions they've had in the past. And New Brunswick is slightly less. So the next and essentially final slide is, if we're going to reduce emissions using natural gas, there's essentially two ways, and I'm sure the two speakers will correct me on this. There's essentially two ways: natural gas or renewable natural gas through the heating system, and we have emissions for the energy service, which would be heating, industrial space, or water. Next, please. The other is to use natural gas as the primary energy source through a conversion process, a thermal generation, or probably gas turbine in this day and age, but there's still emissions. Secondary energy, electricity, we get the heating system, and again, there should be no emissions in that case, but that's another issue. And the energy service gives us heating, industrial space, and water as before. So that's it for me, other than asking a series of questions to both Mark and Jennifer. The first is, where will the energy come from? It's one thing to say, oh yes, we got all this energy, natural gas or whatever, but where will it come from? And we'll start with natural gas because that's what we're more familiar with. And I'll open it up to Mark.
Well, thank you, Larry. First off, I think it's, oh gosh, I'm getting a big echo here. Here we go. How's that? That's better. So I think from a standpoint of where does it come from, that's one of our constraint issues we have in Atlantic Canada. Currently we source the majority of our natural gas through pipelines that sometimes, all go through the US. And I know when I was in Nova Scotia Power, we were actually buying from as far away as Alberta. So I think, from what I would read is there are many possible ways to start to develop natural gas in the Atlantic provinces. And that could possibly, create some price mitigation. I think one of Neil was speaking of some of the winter pricing challenges. And that's driven by US Northeast demand and pipeline constraints on the main line. And so, actually having a coordinated energy policy that starts to look at both integrating electricity and natural gas in the right fashion can actually start to shape and smooth policy development of natural gas in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick PEI, so it can come to its full potential as a planned integrated resource. Larry, I think you may be on. Yeah, there we are.
No, for some reason I was muted. However, the one question that's raising its head in the province is the issue of fracking. Will fracking be an issue in, for example, Nova Scotia? And it's kind of a loaded question. Of course, it's going to be an issue because people are already complaining. However,
so I think, like any development opportunity, there needs to be good education. There needs to be great engagement and consultation, and there needs to be unified understanding of the value proposition for the stakeholders. And then ultimately that determines whether an investment of that type would go ahead. And I think there's no question it's a thorny issue. It has definitely been one in New Brunswick. But whether we like it or not, we're consuming fracked gas. And and you know, there's a lot of track record that says it can be done safely. So there's a lot to be done on education and understanding and collaboration around that.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, renewable natural gas. This might be new to some people, so could you give a bit of a background to it, and we'll take it from there?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you so much for allowing some of that education to happen for renewable natural gas, because I think it's got a lot of opportunity for Atlantic Canada. I do have a few slides, and I'm not sure if now is the appropriate time to bring them up, but I would start off by saying renewable natural gas is a molecule that is molecularly similar to natural gas. So it's a CH4 molecule. It can be a drop-in replacement for natural gas. So in that way, there is no impact to the end user. So any of our speakers today could receive that molecule in the pipeline just as they receive it as a natural gas molecule, and it requires no alterations to the end use. So you as a resident using your dryer, or a business using your commercial dryers in this case, would have no impact to seeing renewable natural gas in the pipeline. And Canada currently has nearly 300 active and operating biogas and RNG projects across the country. So they're taking over 2 million tons of waste materials, typically organic waste materials, and going through a process called anaerobic digestion, or collection of methane within landfills, and converting that to energy. And that can be done in the form of electricity, heat, or renewable natural gas molecules. The combination of those nearly 300 projects are producing approximately 32 petajoules of total low carbon energy. That is reducing emissions by over 8 megatons per year of greenhouse gases. And we have lots of projects that are also currently in the pipeline. Next slide. So to the question of where does this come from? And I think it's really appropriate to kind of, in the context of what we're seeing globally and shifts in markets, this is a domestic opportunity in terms of utilizing those materials that are currently from the agricultural sector. So farms and food processors, looking at the municipal communities who have been using anaerobic digestion as a process for many, many decades in treating wastewater or industrial grade uses. I also spoke to landfill gas, where a lot of our organic waste streams have been deposited, and those materials are simply rotting in place, creating methane, and being able to collect that methane and being able to use it for alternative beneficial uses is ultimately what we see as the source of that renewable electricity or renewable natural gas. And so this is a snapshot of the breakdown of those projects and the amount of clean energy that is being produced across those nearly 300 projects today in Canada. Next slide. And what I wanted to highlight that, you know, there is a multifaceted end use for biogas. We saw traditionally a lot of early stage development in electricity, but what I wanted to highlight for this conversation is that over the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years, there's been a real increase in appetite for renewable natural gas, that methane molecule that can be collected, processed, and integrated into the existing infrastructure. And that as I said, is a substitute for any industrial process that's currently needing new investment, looking at how to lower emissions. I'd highlight that these projects are active and operating across all 10 provinces in the country, including in Atlantic Canada. And we'll probably get into some of the more specifics around other questions, but recognizing that as we're looking in this global competitive market around the sources of inputs that are producing the products, part of the equation is also that sustainability element. And so renewable natural gas plays very well into lowering the carbon intensity of your product, given the fact that it is not originating from a fossil source, it's originating from a biogenic source. So I'll pause there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jennifer. The next question might seem a bit strange, but how are emissions reduced? Mark, do you want to explain? Now, we do have either how are emissions reduced? There were the two pictures I showed. One was through a furnace, and the other was through the electricity system.
So I think there's a variety of ways to reduce emissions. Let's start on the electricity sector a bit. Natural gas plays a pivotal role in decarbonizing the electricity grid. And what's interesting, and a lot of work that's been done over the last 5 or 6 years, is you find that natural gas generation can enable multiples of renewable wind or solar facilities and create a complementary product. So work has shown that you can decarbonize the electricity grid to over 90% using these strategies, and you can start to see that with the work that's been done through some of the integrated resource plans in Atlantic Canada recent. And Nova Scotia, the new independent system operator, is making a call for new peaking natural gas plants. Well, the rest of the story to that is it helps enable over 1,000 megawatts of wind generation. So the carbon intensity of the electricity input is dramatically reduced on that front. And of course, coal is not going to be around after 2030, and thank goodness for that. I think then moving into the end use segment, there's a lot of ways in which natural gas and electricity are complementary products, especially when the infrastructure is existing. So as it's been talked on the call so far today, is there are peak times and then there's resiliency moments where having a natural gas source can shave the peak, which we know is a challenge in the electricity sector as new grid assets are required. So you can have a peaking strategy working with an electricity strategy. And that can actually work really well when there's infrastructure present. And we saw the development graph from Chris, and it shows a good penetration into the into the dense population areas of Halifax. Having a peaking coordination strategy around that, because infrastructure from both utilities are there, would be a really interesting proposition. And I think there was a comment Chris made about some integrated resource planning around that, and it does boil up to that larger level. The interesting thing is that work out there is showing that when you come in with clean electricity and then have I call it the multiplying effect. So there's efficiency down steps through transitions, but there's also efficiency up steps in things like heat pumps. So heat pumps work well actually in a moderate climate of Atlantic Canada, but we do get those cold days. And especially as you go further north in New Brunswick, there are more of those days. So you need different solutions to look after the peak. So there are solutions that work when they can work in collaboration in more dense areas. And I think there's a great opportunity to pull down the total carbon footprint by using natural gas in collaboration with electricity. The other is there are some processes which naturally work better for natural gas. So I think Maritime paper, you're using a high temperature requirement that can't be served by heat pumps. So you're right, the efficiency drops don't work well for electricity, but when there's modest heating demand, which is like area or space heating, where you're only looking to generally get up to temperatures of 20 Celsius, maybe 25, heat pump technology can recover the efficiency on the other side. But again, there's a need sometimes for the peak. So I think it's actually about some integrated planning on the peaks where the the infrastructure works, and then recognizing that, you know, when you have to build infrastructure, either on the electrical side or the gas side, what is the best answer for the customer? At the end of the day, they are going to be the ones that are going to pay either the rates, the bills, the tariffs, and such. And so what is the best overall strategy for that? I think that kind of thinking can significantly affect and reduce our total carbon footprint and increase the overall efficiency of the way we use energy as a total in Atlantic Canada.
Jennifer, comments or suggestions or views on this?
So I would respond to the question of how are emissions reduced in describing how, because I referenced that the source of renewable natural gas is a biogenic source. It's coming from agricultural sources, food waste, landfills, etc. And so that's really kind of key to understanding how emissions are reduced when we're talking about renewable natural gas. So if you have a methane molecule that's dropping into the existing infrastructure, into that natural gas pipeline, commingling with that molecule and servicing the customer or the business, again, it has no impact to that end use. But what it is doing is it's that one molecule of renewable natural gas is displacing a natural gas molecule that would have come from a fossil source. So in that one instance, that's kind of the first punch of how emissions are achieved, emission reductions are achieved when using renewable natural gas. Now, it was highlighted that renewable natural gas can actually have an emissions, a carbon intensity that's zero. It can even go lower than zero if you factor in the avoided emissions. And what I mean by that is if you take a status quo practice within an agricultural community or otherwise where those methane emissions would be released into the atmosphere, instead you're using biogas or converting into renewable natural gas, you're actually then capturing those upstream methane sources and therefore reducing the emissions that would be going into the atmosphere. So that's the second punch. So you have this two-way punch with respect to emissions reductions when you're incorporating a blend of renewable natural gas into the natural gas supply.
Okay, following on from that, Jennifer, just a quick question. Why should someone care whether CH4 methane is put into the atmosphere or carbon dioxide CO2? They both have carbon.
Right. So the damage to the atmosphere with respect to a methane molecule versus a carbon dioxide molecule is about 80 times more damaging to our environment. And so if we are capturing those methane emissions, we're actually improving the quality or the degradation of our stratosphere by being able to capture those methane molecules. And so that is by far the reason why, if we're actually being able to capture the methane, we're improving the climate overall.
And if we then take that a step further and the technology is mature enough to start removing the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it makes more sense to try to remove the carbon dioxide than it does to remove the methane. Because as you said, there is this two-punch by capturing the methane before it escapes and consuming it and turning it into CO2.
Right. In fact, there's even further improvements to the technology that are using first anaerobic digestion to capture that methane, then being able to extract the carbon dioxide that is also released to be able to use in other industrial processes. And that monetization of CO2 utilization is also another element that is added onto these systems.
Yes, but that would also be true for natural gas systems as well. Sorry.
I'll apologize, Larry. If I can just jump in really quick, we're quickly running out of time, but we did have an interesting question in the chat. If we could add that to the conversation, if that's possible.
Certainly.
Maybe for everybody here, I can read it off. It's in front of me. how energy intensive is capturing the methane molecule to consume it? I think there's a conversation about the actual capture of the molecule, and then maybe as well, Mark, you could speak to the efficiencies possibly in electricity too, depending on how that's used.
Yep, I can do that one.
So why don't I start off and
Sure, please,
to
Jennifer.
recognize that there is a cost, obviously, to being able to incorporate. There is a high capital cost for a renewable natural gas project that obviously is an element of infrastructure that would be collecting, processing, and being able to convert those molecules into something that can be injected into the pipeline. So there is a cost associated with that. The question is, how does that get then translated to the customer or consumer? And again, the question of policies, the layering of carbon policies specifically. I can point to the clean fuels regulation and other pieces that are helping to dampen that cost for consumers at the end. So I'll leave it there because it's another whole element, but clean fuel regulation can definitely be a play here.
Mark?
Yeah, so I think, capturing of carbon dioxide from a flue stream out of a gas plant is still relatively expensive. The cost can be, a fairly high efficiency hit to the overall turnover, so more than 30%. So it really does, need some more time and attention from the investment cycle. But going back to what Jennifer said, there are signals like the carbon pricing is designed to start to incent the development of the technology and further in advancing these elements as well. What I would say, though, is so far it's been more effective for customers to, in fact, very carefully use gas peaking, and this is electricity, and insert direct renewables with zero emissions, such as wind and solar. And that has been a more effective tool. There'll be potentially a crossover point at some point, and that'll be a moment in the future where that will take off more as the technology develops.
Okay, this is actually very annoying because we've come to the end of our time, apparently. We're getting some very interesting conversations. I would like to thank Jennifer and Mark for their all too brief comments, which I would have really preferred more. But thank you both. Do appreciate it, and thank you for Jonathan. I will send you the correct slides, or if you look in your email, Jonathan, you will find my correct slides. Anyway, thank you one and all.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thanks, Larry, Jennifer, and Mark for those insights, and to all the other speakers. I think I agree, Larry, there's never enough time, whether it's during a session or during a day, to have these important conversations. So we certainly appreciate everybody for joining us here today. I hope that you are signing off, I guess, with a better understanding of the role that natural gas plays today in Atlantic Canada. We know that it heats buildings, powers businesses, and certainly generates electricity, but also that you're leaving with some optimism that this fossil fuel will certainly be part of a creative, forward-looking solution that can help our energy system remain affordable and reliable while we decarbonize. So if you'd like to know more about natural gas or about nearly any other type of energy used in Atlantic Canada, I encourage you to visit atlanticaenergy.org. We have an Energy 101 series, energy resource maps, and the latest news from around the region. You can also sign up to receive our monthly highlights newsletter, which is going out on a Wednesday morning, and there's lots of good stuff in there. So thanks again for joining us. We have included a feedback link in the chat if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute and giving us your feedback, and we certainly welcome emails anytime with feedback or questions, and we'll certainly get back to you. So thanks. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.